Sonic X Shadow Generations has been out for a good while now, and to the surprise of many, has been receiving almost universal praise and accolades from both critics and fans alike. It's great to see the series get a win like this, and having played the Shadow Generations portion of the game to 100%, I can confirm it's an awesome time. Fun levels with tons of replayability, incredible animations with tons of detail, and an honestly heartwarming story are all things the series has been in severe lack of, I want to say, since 2008 Sonic Unleashed. Now, while the Shadow Generations portion of the game has been met with an overwhelming amount of positive reception, the Sonic Generations re-release that was somewhat safely packaged alongside it ended up being a source of admittedly minor but still very real disappointment among myself and some other fans, or at the very least, I've got some confusion regarding it. As far as a remaster goes, the changes are actually quite few, which is honestly a good thing for a re-release like this. Gameplay-wise, the only thing added was how there are now 3 Chao to find in each stage, but with there being no reward or incentive to do so, the inclusion is pretty baffling, as they end up just being a more pointless, but thankfully optional, version of searching for medals in Sonic Unleashed. Undoubtedly the most talked about change, however, has been how the story of the game has been completely rewritten and re-recorded. Sort of. The story is more or less the exact same, just with largely minor script changes down to just changing words around in some instances, being completely re-recorded even in instances where the dialogue is the exact same. So why did it get this treatment at all? Sonic Colors Ultimate didn't feel the need to change anything. What was the intention here exactly? Was it to change character personalities and try to sweep under the rug less than marketable characterization?
It's kind of impossible to surprise you.
You totally got me this time. I had no idea.
It's kind of impossible to surprise you.
You totally got me this time. I had no idea.
Maybe it was to harken back to the days of 4Kids dubbing by censoring out scary words that allude to death.
Thanks, Sonic. I thought I was dead, floating without a body in a black limbo. Ugh. Thanks, Sonic. That was awful. I couldn't tell where I was or what had happened. Ugh.
It's the last look you'll get before I close your eyes forever. It's the last thing you'll see in this world.
Perhaps it was to remove language, jokes, and implications that are considered by some to no longer be acceptable.
Thanks, Sonic. You did a good job back there. Hey, did you gain weight?
Thanks, Sonic. Now then, tell me, where is the rest of my island?
The world? I'm going to own the world when I'm finished with Sonic! Wow, will I really get that crazy? So, I'm going to erase that line and reshape it as I see fit! And they call me eccentric.
Whatever your pick among those, I'm sure their intention wasn't to come off like a bunch of people with media comprehension issues, but alas, here we are. See, with everything else, for a reasonable but still relatively understanding person such as myself, the changes and such weren't not much more than an eye roll. But what ended up grabbing my interest beyond all else was how the writing team for this remaster seems to have fundamentally misunderstood aspects of its own narrative, including what is maybe the most interesting aspect of the game's story, that being the reveal of classic Eggman.
Okay, Gruesome, you're cornered. So how about you just give up and restore the timeline like you found it?
You're not in a position to demand anything, you nasty little pincushion.
Eggman! No wonder!
He had a little help.
Dr. Robotnik?
Nobody calls me that anymore. If you...
I'm getting ahead of myself though. Sonic Generations has an overall pretty bare bones, dull, and boring story all things considered. I think the total cutscene runtime falls around 20 minutes. Compared to entries before and after it in the series, especially the other anniversary titles, it ends up feeling quite hollow and empty. It isn't offensively bad like Lost World and Forces can feel, but it certainly won't be winning any awards in storytelling, so believe me when I say fun moments and highlights are few and far between when it comes to Sonic Generations cutscenes. That being said, the reveal of there being 2 Eggmen running the show behind the scenes for each other to manipulate the heroes is probably the only aspect of the story that feels well thought out and has a genuine payoff when the classic era Eggman shows himself for the first time right before the final boss fight. It's like a bam, surprise, bet you weren't expecting this, and it's like it gets your blood pumping in this otherwise yawn-inducing experience. However, with just a few minor tweaks, Sonic Generations Remastered completely changes the setup, so let's take a look at how each version handles the events. I'll be using the PS3 version of the game to represent the original release of Generations, with the remaster being captured on PS5. This will probably be obvious considering how crusty OG Generations looks by comparison, but I'll be putting the logos on screen when relevant. In OG Gens, Eggman is first encountered at the first era boss fight, utilizing the Death Egg robot. Before the fight, we can't see Eggman, but we can hear him taunting Sonic from the boss door, and he sounds no different than how he did in recent entries in the series at the time, like Sonic Unleashed and Sonic Colors.
Take a good look at yourself, Sonic.
Dr. Eggman?
The Death Egg robot cockpit keeps Eggman concealed for the entire boss fight that ensues, so we can't see him here either. After the fight, classic Sonic goes in to investigate the destroyed robot, but the would-be antagonist, the Time Eater, swoops in and steals Eggman away, but here he is cleverly concealed within a ball of purple energy that's sucking him up. It's pretty innocuous, and you'd be forgiven for not just assuming there isn't even a classic Eggman counterpart, as while Sonic and Tails do, even as early as the classic era levels, characters such as Amy and Knuckles do not have a counterpart present, despite having classic designs that they could have utilized. Eggman is assumed by the group of heroes to be kidnapped by the monster, and we don't hear anything from him again until the boss fight of the final era, where Eggman is again featured using the Egg Dragoon. We can clearly see him this time and during the boss fight and right afterwards though, sporting his usual design. After he's defeated, classic Tails is even confused on why Eggman is here at all, since they already thought Eggman was taken by the Time Eater, so clearly the intention is to mislead players as to what exactly is going on.
What's Eggman even doing here? I thought you said he'd been kidnapped by that big weird thing that sent us all to this place. See? He was kidnapped. This is getting stranger all the time.
Sharper players might deduce that there are two Eggmen running around, but even then the game has you thinking and theorizing about what's going on, which makes it all the more sweeter when, whether you figured it out or not, classic Eggman reveals himself at the end. When the heroes go to confront the Time Eater for the final boss fight, it's revealed that the Time Eater is just being piloted by Eggman so they can bail each other out when their revenge schemes fail in the previously discussed boss fights, while also tricking the Sonics into thinking the monster is responsible for everything. It's nothing groundbreaking, but the reveal is a good one that I have no doubt caught new and old-time players off guard in the original, and the banter between the Eggmen and the Sonics and jokes about their name change is all good fun, especially for an otherwise underwhelming story. It's why the changes made in the remaster to this setup and reveal are so confusing and lead me to believe that they just didn't get what was going on at all. Switching over to that side of things, after the Death Egg robot fight, they actually changed the animation so that we can see classic Eggman right away, which in my opinion kind of ruins everything right there. This is especially surprising because this is the only scene I noticed in the game that had its visuals changed that wasn't related to Amy, so they clearly really wanted to change this scene in particular. Anyway, then when the heroes encounter modern Eggman after the Egg Dragoon fight, Tails in this version has the meaning of his lines changed completely so that instead of wondering how Eggman could be there, he specifically acknowledges the existence of two Eggman by stating that the Time Eater now has both, which is the exact opposite intention of the dialogue from the original.
Stopping Eggman is always good. But the root of the problem is that monster. Maybe we can call a truce and... Look! He got your Eggman too! Oh, this is getting serious.
This makes it so that when Eggman reveals that he's controlling the Time Eater, you immediately also know that classic Eggman is helping too, before anyone even says anything about it. It's just so weird, because why would you go out of your way to undermine the game's own setup and payoff when nothing about the story itself has changed in any other way otherwise? Which is why I genuinely believe that they, whether that be Ian Flynn or someone on the team, did not understand what was going on in this, I want to emphasize, super simple story. If someone has a counter theory, I'd love to hear it. Beyond the classic Eggman reveal, they ended up doing quite a bit of rewriting in this remaster to try to address complaints over the years about the original story that resulted in fumbling the original intentions of other scenes. Another example is in the cutscene where Sonic and Tails discuss Green Hill Zone. In the OG version, Sonic barely remembers Green Hill Zone, and Tails says he doesn't recognize it at all.
Is it me, or is that place we were just in awfully familiar?
Not to me.
The intent was, obviously, to reference that 1, Sonic 1 was a long time ago, and 2, Tails wasn't even in that game, which explains why they have their respective recollections of it. Of course, at time of release, people made fun of these lines because while at the time Green Hill hadn't been featured by name in recent games, other levels like Seaside Hill from Sonic Heroes, Neo Green Hill from Sonic Advance, and Splash Hill from Sonic 4 all featured similar iconography, so for the actually Sonic fans, or those just joking around, it was silly for them not to recognize it in some way. Lore-wise, I think we can all acknowledge that this writing made more sense though. Correct me if I'm wrong about this, but Sonic just ran through Green Hill once like several years ago, and probably didn't give it a second thought. It's not like he lived there, I think. So it makes sense for him to not really care about it, like some people, but not me, in the real world do. Of course, in the remastered dialogue though, Sonic and Tails banter about it like the reference machines they are now, name-dropping both it and the island Green Hill apparently exists on.
Is it just me, or does Green Hill look different?
This isn't South Island, and all the color and life's been drained from it. Totally strange.
I mean, why understand the dialogue and leave it as is when you can rewrite it to serve the opposite purpose and knock out some eye-rolling references while you're at it? We all win. I know that we recognize Green Hill, but in the context of original Sonic Generations, that was pretty far past, relatively speaking. We know with hindsight that the classic era levels in particular were alerting to our own real-world future, with them being reused in titles that came after like Sonic Forces and Sonic Frontiers, but they didn't know that. Same thing happens when Sonic and Tails reflect on Chemical Plant, and there are other little cases of this throughout other scenes in the game as well, so I mean, we really have two options to consider here. Either the writer, or writers, understood and acknowledged the fairly logical intentions of the dialogue and chose to change it so they could make extra references, or it went over their heads and they changed a bunch of things because they didn't get it. The Eggman changes makes no sense to me, so for that one, you already know which way I'm leaning, but let me know what you think down in the comments. Maybe I'm a little crazy, and I know I'm at least a little crazy for even caring about this sort of thing. Overall, I think the remastered dialogue is pretty across the board much worse than the original, not just because of these changes, but also for the mostly sloppy voice performances. Mike Pollock was no doubt sleeping at the wheel when he recorded the Eggman lines, and even lines that are unchanged from the original are negatively impacted by a less energetic delivery.
You're not in a position to demand anything, you nasty little pincushion.
Eggman! But how?
He had a little help.
Dr. Robotnik!
Nobody calls me that anymore. You're not in a position to demand anything, you nasty little pincushion.
Eggman! No wonder!
He had a little help.
Dr. Robotnik?
Nobody calls me that anymore.
Nobody calls me that anymore. Like, come on, the line isn't even different. Just use the old one. And don't bring up his age, okay? People keep talking about him like he's like 100, while the dude is just pushing 60. Sheesh, he isn't that old. My grandma would have knocked these lines out of the park. Another classic amateur mistake that rears its ugly head is trying to fit a line way too long into a limited space and having to reach Sonic speeds to get through it in time.
It was great teaming up with you, or me. Maybe this will fast-track you to learning some new tricks in the future. Wait, I mean, past. Ugh.
I will say, somewhat unrelated, that nothing quite humbles you like finding out a character's voice that you previously didn't like in comparison to the previous one at the time was now replaced themselves by what feels like an equally extreme downgrade, but now you miss the one you never appreciated. I'm so sorry, Travis Willingham. All in all though, the Sonic Generations story wasn't anything to write home about either way, so it isn't like we lost something major with the changes. I do think it sets a dangerous precedent, as I would be pretty miffed to see a game like Sonic Unleashed or Sonic Heroes get its dialogue rewritten and re-recorded. If you're going to do a simple remaster, the story should be maintained for game preservation and art preservation purposes. A full remake can probably get away with redoing the story, but I hate remakes anyway and infinitely prefer remasters so that we can just enjoy old games in peace. That's a story for another day though. The Sonic X Shadow Generations package as a whole still comes highly recommended for me for the excellent Shadow campaign alone, and still the Sonic Generations gameplay is a maintained high quality. If you liked this video, I would recommend checking out my last one, where I sifted through Shadow the Hedgehog to determine which route was overall the best, both in terms of story and factoring in the gameplay, that, while sloppy, I'm still definitely proud of. Otherwise, I hope you have an awesome rest of your day, and stay safe.